Good afternoon. Will the Committee of Supply please come to order? This section of the Committee of Supply will now resume consideration of the estimates of Indigenous reconciliation and Northern relations. As previously agreed, questioning for this department will proceed in a global manner. The floor is now open for questions. The member from Kuwaitanuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if the Minister can provide us with an organizational chart for the department and any vacancies that are there.
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you. I will refer the member, Mr. Chair, to the main estimate supplement, budget 2021, page 3, for the organizational structure. I replaced the minister with myself. The deputy minister is Michelle Dubik, and the financial administrative services, Mike Sosiak, Executive Financial Officer. Northern Affairs, Paul Doolin, Executive Director. Consultation and Reconciliation, Jeff Sorenchuk, the Director. And Policy and Strategic Initiatives, Scott DeJagger, the Director. In the department, we have 82 full-time equivalents. Right now, we currently have 12 vacancies. Of those, there are 6 competitions in progress.
The member from Kuwaitanuk.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. The other day, in estimates, we had talked about Orange Shirt Day and it being made into a statutory holiday or recognized as a stat holiday here in Manitoba. And you had made reference to it being more of an observance rather than a stat holiday. The question was raised in QP again today. And in QP, you stated that we started engagement, quote, a while ago. And I'm just wondering, in regards to that stat holiday, when is a while ago and who has been part of that process?
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Well, thank the member for Kuwaitanuk for that question. Yeah, just continuing with my answer the other day, I think last week, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created with a mandate to inform all Canadians about what happened in residential schools. The TRC engaged in research and a truth-telling process of events across the country to document the truths of survivors, the families, communities, and everyone personally affected by the residential school experience. The TRC concluded its mandate in 2015 with the release of its final report. Now, the work of the TRC has put forth the following challenge to all Canadians, and that is, how do we define understand and advance reconciliation so that it goes beyond mere words and become integrated in our lives, our daily activities, and our actions. The TRC describes reconciliation as an ongoing process of establishing and maintaining respectful relationships. Key to this description is that reconciliation is ongoing. It is not a destination or something that is achieved and checked off of a to-do list. It will require continual effort and action over time. The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a federal statutory holiday, was introduced this year through the passing of Bill C-5. It is observed on September 30th, which is also known to us as Orange Shirt Day. This is a day to recognize and reflect on the tragic history and ongoing legacy of residential schools, honor the survivors, and remember the children who did not return home. Since 2013, Orange Shirt Day has been a day of reflection. It started when a group of former students of the St. Joseph Mission Residential School in British Columbia came together to memorialize and honor the healing journey of residential school survivors and their families. Both the date and the color orange were intentionally chosen for this day. Phyllis Webstad, a survivor of the school, told her story of having her new orange shirt that was gifted to her by her grandmother confiscated by the school, along with all of her belongings. Since this day, the color orange has reminded Phyllis of how she was made to feel as though she did not matter. The date was chosen because September was the month when children throughout the country were removed from their homes, their families, and their culture, and brought to the residential schools, some of them never to return. The annual Orange Shirt Day on September 30th is an opportunity to create meaningful discussions about the effects of residential schools and the legacies they have left behind. It is a day for survivors to be reminded that they matter, and so do those that have been affected. The Manitoba Public Service recognized the federal statutory holiday by closing non-essential government services and offices for the day to give public servants the opportunity to recognize the history and impacts of residential schools. The flags were lowered to half-mast on all provincial government buildings, and the Manitoba Legislative Building was lit in orange. This holiday responds to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 80, which calls for the creation of a national holiday to honor Indigenous survivors, families, and communities, and ensure national public recognition of residential schools as a vital part of reconciliation. Other employers in Manitoba chose to honor the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in ways that are tailored for their environments. The government of Manitoba has declared September 30th as a non-statutory holiday for 2021 and will be undertaking a series of engagements with Indigenous leadership, survivors, and the Labor Management Review Committee to explore options for future recognition of the day. I was pleased that our government was able to support a number of events in this first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. I am pleased that the response from Manitoba was overwhelming. This year, several departments, including Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations, Sports, Culture and Heritage, and Education, supported the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation's week-long event. In closing, the government of Manitoba is committed to advancing reconciliation with Indigenous
Minister's
people.
time has expired. The member from Quaitnook.
I've heard many times the word action, the word meaningful, reconciliation, referring to they matter. So I'm going to ask the minister if he can respond and comment exactly how and if and when Manitoba's government is going to support the search for and in disclosure of potential residential grave sites here in Manitoba.
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The tragic identification of over 6,000 unmarked graves of children who attended Indian residential schools across the country has sparked a nationwide conversation on the tragedy and lasting impacts of Canada's residential school system. Manitoba is seeking to advance an Indigenous-led approach and government-wide response to identify, investigate, protect, and commemorate the unmarked graves of missing children who attended Indian residential schools across Manitoba. On June 21st, 2021, Manitoba committed $2.5 million to begin work to locate missing children who attended residential schools. Allocations will be determined through engagements with Indigenous nations, leadership, residential school survivors, elders, and knowledge keepers to understand the best use of the funding. Actions are being advanced to address the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 71 to 76, focused on missing children who attended Indian residential schools. The government of Manitoba is actively understanding its role to facilitate an Indigenous-led process developed in partnership with Indigenous nations, communities, survivors, and families. Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations is leading this work to develop an IRS action plan with the support of additional departments, including Justice, Finance, Sports, Culture, and Heritage. Initial steps will identify and address any potential challenges associated with policies, regulations, and legislation. Develop strategies and procedures with Indigenous partners to locate missing children and locate, commemorate, and protect cemeteries and other sites where they may be buried. A provincial advisory committee is being established to guide the work to structure the engagements. Invited participants include representatives from the Assembly of Southern Chiefs Organization, Manitoba Kuwait-Nawi, Okimakanak, Southern Chiefs Organization, Manitoba Métis Federation, Manitoba Inuit Association, City of Winnipeg, the federal government, and the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Representatives from Justice, Sports, Culture and Heritage, and Finance will also be invited to the table. The Sioux Valley Dakota Nation, the Pasquiat Cree Nation, Long Plain First Nation, and Sagin First Nation have initiated ground search using ground penetrating radar and other methods to locate unmarked graves associated with former residential school sites. Former work stemming from the work stemming for over 10 years, the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation with academic partners have identified 104 graves associated with the Brandon Residential School across 3 locations. Other First Nations are in the initial stages of collecting and analyzing information. Manitoba is supporting the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation, the OCN, and the Long Plain First Nation. Indigenous nations across the country have expressed a desire for the involvement of policing investigation oversight in these searches. IRNR is exploring with Justice the role and involvement of policing authorities in this work. Manitoba has provided almost $200,000 to regional Indian residential school healing centers to support a variety of cultural events centered on reconciliation, healing, and honoring of September 30th, 2021. The news from across Canada related to residential schools is a grim reminder of the cruel impact that these schools have had and are still having on the lives of Indigenous children, families, and communities. And a reminder that as we work to reconcile our relationships, we must also reconcile with our past. We owe it to the children who were forced to attend residential schools across the nation to remember the tragedies of the past and to use the lessons we have learned from them to create a better future. The government of Manitoba is committed to working in partnership with Indigenous communities, leaders, elders, and knowledge keepers to commemorate and protect Indian residential school burial sites. The first meeting of our Provincial Advisory Committee will be tomorrow morning.
The member from Quaitanook.
Thank you. I assume the Minister for Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations then is the government's lead and the government's person that they look to in regards to Indigenous reconciliation, Northern relations issues. So in regards to the Land Acknowledgement Task Force that's been announced, can the Minister explain why he is not included in that process and why he is not the lead on that task force?
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. For us, Indigenous land acknowledgements are becoming standard practice, and that has followed the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. In recent years, organizations, post-secondary institutions, businesses, sporting organizations, and several municipal governments across Manitoba have incorporated and adopted the use of Indigenous land acknowledgements. All Manitoba departments continue to advance reconciliation through their respective mandates, with some departments requesting assistance from Indigenous reconciliation and Northern relations in developing land acknowledgements. IRNR is currently working internally to carry out research on best practice land acknowledgement protocols that departments can utilize for future events, meetings, and gatherings to recognize Indigenous ancestral lands. It is customary Indigenous tradition to acknowledge host people and their territory at the onset of any meeting, event, or gathering. Acknowledging traditional territory shows recognition of and respect for Indigenous people and the Indigenous nations that encompass the territory and treaty. It also values the diversity amongst First Nations, Métis, and Inuit and their distinct cultures, worldviews, and protocols. Recognition and respect are essential elements of establishing healthy reciprocal relations, relationships that are key towards the path to reconciliation. Furthermore, acknowledging treaty and traditional territories reinforces the government's commitment to reconciliation and to Indigenous nations, communities, and people. Land acknowledgements recognize the specific territory and Indigenous people where an event, gathering, or meeting is occurring. Additional Indigenous nations and peoples are also recognized with an acknowledgement depending on the geographical location, like the Métis National Homeland the Inuit, or the Dene. On occasion, Manitoba departments have requested assistance from INR in providing a land acknowledgement for these events and meetings. We believe that there is a place for land acknowledgements within the government, and we will be working closely with Indigenous communities, stakeholders, and organizations on how we can incorporate land acknowledgements in a meaningful way to recognize the ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. Our government is committed to advancing reconciliation, build on meaningful engagement with Indigenous nations and people. We will be taking concrete steps to consulting Indigenous communities and incorporating land acknowledgements. And I said in my last response to this question that I have the greatest of confidence in the abilities of my colleagues to undertake this work, work that we feel is very important for Manitoba. And everyone in government needs to be able to demonstrate a cultural competence with respect to land acknowledgements. Thank you.
Member from Kuwait-Nook.
Well, it's great that you have confidence in your colleagues, because they clearly don't have confidence in the minister. Otherwise, you'd be leading this task force. When you speak about respect for Indigenous communities, but yet the minister himself would not put himself to be the lead in those discussions when you are the face of government when it comes time to Indigenous issues. So again, I ask the minister, why are you not a member of the task force?
So just before I call on the minister, just a very quick reminder to everybody that all questions and answers should be posed through the chair. So in saying that, the Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and take a little exception to the member's statement that it has to do with confidence. Leading has nothing to do with confidence in your ability to lead. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with respect to reconciliation throughout the whole of government, and undertakings are occurring with all of my colleagues across government and every department. Our department is leading on work with Indigenous residential schools, with the MMIWG as an example. And I promised the member from Kuwait-Nook I will be active in every space when it comes to reconciliation. More work needs to be done on the file of land acknowledgement across government. And I'm happy to see, we're actually glad to see that the member feels it is important to be involved in this very important work.
Member from Quaitanook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to the Path to Reconciliation Act, within the Path to Reconciliation Act, the legislation regarding reporting requirements under Section 5.2 was changed from within 3 months after the end of the fiscal year, the minister must table a copy of the report in the Assembly and make it available to the public. It was changed to the minister must table a copy of the report in the Assembly on any of the first 15 days on which the Assembly is sitting under the minister after the minister completes it. It appears this minister reduces the accountability of the minister to produce this in a timely fashion. Can the minister explain why this change was made to the legislation?
Just to save a little bit of work on that last question, my understanding is the question involved Bill 75, which is currently before the House. So therefore, we are unable to discuss that in estimates. So we will go back to the member from Quaitanook for another question. The member from Quaitanook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that clarification. In regards to drinking water, the Auditor General report on Provincial Oversight of Clean Drinking Water included important recommendations, and it appears that the department is attempting to respond to some of them now. Can the Minister please provide a breakdown of where the department is at with implementing these?
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and safe potable drinking water for all Manitobans is a top priority of our government. And the Manitoba Office of the Auditor General released its report on provincial drinking water systems in September of 2020. And the report outlined recommendations to improve Manitoba's regulations, processes, and policies to improve the quality and safety of drinking water in the province. 4 of the 18 recommendations from the OAG report impacted Indigenous reconciliation and Northern relations community water systems. The OAG report examined the adequacy of the Department of Conservation and Climate's oversight provincial drinking water safety processes. There were 18 recommendations for provincial oversight of drinking water safety. The 4 that directly impact IR/NR water systems include a requirement for all non-compliant water systems to develop plans to comply with all requirements, recommendations to adequately train and support water system operators, recommendations to review and implement the appropriate certification requirements, and development of a strategy and targets to reduce long-term boil water advisories. Most of the water systems in the IR/NR communities are owned by the department and operated by the communities. A collaborative approach is needed to address the recommendations. IR/NR is part of provincial oversight of Drinking Water Steering Committee to implement the recommendations of the OAG report. The department will work with Conservation and Climate, Economic Development and Training, and Municipal Relations to address the recommendations specific to IR/NR. The committee will provide an opportunity for interdepartmental collaboration and cooperation with respect to issues of drinking water quality and the recommendations of the OAG following the review of the provincial oversight of drinking water safety document. IR/NR has already taken steps to address non-compliant water systems and to improve operator certification. IR/NR has currently taken steps working with Conservation and Climate. IRNI has identified the areas of non-compliance in Northern Affairs communities, and we're working with the Drinking Water Safety Subcommittee to monitor ongoing processes and to identify potential options to compliance. A pilot circuit rider project to provide on-site, hands-on training to water system operators was initiated this fiscal year and is already helping community operators gain confidence in their water systems. Capital upgrades work is ongoing or expected to be completed this year to address long-term boil water advisories in Sheridan, Duck Bay, Matheson Island, and Moose Lake. Work in Moose Lake may include connecting to the nearby First Nations water system. Maintenance work in Thicket Portage is expected to address remaining concerns so that advisory can be lifted. Consideration is being given to redesigning Barons River South and Disbro Island as non-potable to address long-term advisories in those small communities. A compliance plan to address bacteria testing concerns was submitted to the Office of Drinking Water and has received approval in principle. The department will be working to implement it this fiscal year. A comprehensive compliance plan to address issues with operator certification is being developed. And we are working with a dedicated, we have a one person dedicated to advance this. Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations welcomes the report of the Drinking Water Safety Oversight from the Office of the Auditor General and is pleased to advance the recommendations specific to our community and water systems. The department continues to assist and support community councils and their water treatment plant operators to treat and provide drinking water that meets legislative requirements.
The member from Quaitanook.
Thank you for the that rather long explanation. You talked about interdepartmental partnerships and stuff within the province of Manitoba and within IR. Indigenous Reconciliation. Sorry, I keep getting the new title mixed up. But however, there are still currently Northern First Nation communities here in Manitoba, like the Taskwayak and Shamattawa First Nations, that do not have access to clean drinking water. So those are children in this province who have never had access to clean drinking water in their entire lives, and this is unacceptable. Can the minister please detail the steps that are being taken to work with the federal government and the First Nation communities to ensure that these communities are able to access clean water?
The Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, potable water is a top priority for this government, potable water for all Manitobans. And generally, it's the federal government that has the responsibility for potable water on our First Nation or on First Nation communities. And we currently look forward to working with the new federal counterparts. Once their cabinet has been formed and we know who the new ministers will be, we will be reaching out to them on this important issue. We want to advance Manitoba's priorities in supporting Manitoba First Nations and the communities on their potable water issues. And I currently know that our staff have ongoing conversations to discuss with our federal officials to discuss the infrastructure and other priorities for our communities. Potable water, as I said, is a top priority. And there are opportunities out there, we believe, to be able to partner on shared infrastructure on a number of fronts.
Member from Quaitnook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions about the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative. Within the annual report, there is a mention of, quote, a review of major program and funding agreements, including the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative. I'm wondering if the minister could please provide more details, perhaps any reports or briefing advisory notes on the funding review that took place within the department.
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Northern Healthy Foods Initiative supports local and regional projects that contribute to the development of culturally relevant, healthy food systems while improving health and well-being. The Northern Healthy Foods Initiative's goal is to increase access to food by working with communities and coordinating efforts aligned with the program's goals and objectives. The NHFI received Treasury Board approval on January 2020 to reallocate existing program funding of $662,000 towards stabilizing the current service delivery model and create a new innovation grants stream to support disruptive approaches to Northern Manitoba food security. Over the last fiscal year, approximately 168,000 pounds of fresh food was accessed by roughly 10,000 participants in the program. Approximately 183 training events were delivered to roughly 3,445 participants from 41 communities, and approximately 24 communities provided intergenerational knowledge transfer around Indigenous food systems to approximately 485 youth. Over the life of the program, approximately 2,488,236 pounds of healthy food has been accessed since 2010-2011, when record keeping began. And projects have accessed over 8.8 million in funds from external sources to support and complement the activities. In-kind support from other stakeholders has been valued at approximately $3.5 million. Now, Mr. Chair, I would just like to ask the member if he could clarify the question a little further. I'm not sure we really fully understood what the question he was asking entailed. So I hope that answered his question. If not, if he could restate it in another way for us.
The member from Quaitnook.
Well, 2.5 minutes later of giving an answer, he then asked for clarification. So I assume he was just trying to talk around that a little bit. So I'll ask another question. Within the annual report, the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative was underspent by almost $250,000, or more accurately, about $244,000. Can the minister please provide an explanation for the underspending?
the Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to tell the member that the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative was one of the priorities that I had when I was traveling through the North. I made it a point to visit these sites and actively see what is occurring in these communities and how they are working with the funding that we are giving them. I want to point out that we did not underspend in the core program. In fact, we have enhanced the program by $163,300. We have also flowed $270,000 through the discretionary grant funding. We have resulted in underspending of the innovation line, which is a new component to the spending that we have. And that is a direct result of COVID and the inability to engage actively with partners in these areas. We continue to focus on providing the funding needed and to work with our partners in these areas. On the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative, we've got some fantastic partners out there who are working double time to ensure that Northern communities have access to fresh, healthy produce. One community that I visited, the gardening project that was occurring there, the entire community was on board. And by the entire community being on board, I mean, the garden is centrally located in the community, and throughout the day, the community members will show up and weed the garden, tend to the plants, help water them, maintain them. And in that program that they have ongoing there, those individual community members also have the opportunity to be able to go to the garden at harvest time and pretty much grab what they need for a good, healthy meal whenever they need it. While I was there, the potatoes were ready in one of the plots, and two individuals showed up, grabbed a shovel, pulled a hill of potatoes, and took off with a nice little meal for themselves. So the program is very important for the North, encouraging growth and production of foods in the North for the North. And it's important that we continue to work with these communities on delivering on that very important aspect.
The member for Kawatnik.
Okay, so just to clarify, the minister is saying that it is in fact not underspent, but yet in the annual report, and even going back the last 5 years, in 2016, 2017, underspent 624,000, 17, 18, underspent 666,000, 2018, 2019, underspent 659,000, 2019, 2020, underspent 692,000, and 2021, underspent 244,000. So in the last 5 years, the program, as it's listed in the annual report, has been underspent by 2.85 million. I'm just wondering, when the minister says that it's not underspent, yet that's a 45% of underspent money in the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative, and it seems to be pretty consistent. I'm just wondering if the minister can clarify, are my figures inaccurate then? Is that not an underspent program?
The Honorable Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the member's information is not correct. It's not wrong in that what we found was the previous programs were not working. So the programs were redesigned with respect to the funding envelope to strengthen the programs. There was significant reinvestment of funding in core programs, and the core funding that was reinvestment in enhanced fundings to do things like support the workers, allowed for greater flexibility to help meet individual community priorities. And they worked to enhance grants for innovation ideas, and 3 of those innovation ideas, just to give you an example, Grand Rapids School of FSD received $35,000 to support a project. This funding was used to create a traditional foods processing space that includes a butchering and a storage facility. The space is for both students and local hunters to process, preserve, store, and learn about traditional foods. Another example, the Churchill Northern Studies Center received $25,000 to support the Rocket Greens hydroponic growing project. The funding was used to hire a 6-month sustainability intern to support the organization as they navigated through the global COVID-19 pandemic and to acquire critical supplies for the hydroponics farming system. As well, NACC received $40,000 to support the increased food production super kits, which were used to purchase greenhouse and irrigation system kits for 12 communities. And looking forward, we're looking forward to development in the innovation line with further development in all of our northern communities.
The member from Kuwait Nook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister had referred to, I might get this wrong, that I was not right, but I was not wrong, or something to that effect. When it came time to discussing the underspending of the Healthy Foods Initiative, or Northern Healthy Foods Initiative. So I'm wondering if the minister can then table the correct numbers for that Northern Healthy Foods Initiative budget, or wherever it was reallocated to.
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Yes, just to clarify for the member, the annual report numbers are correct. So just to state that again, those numbers are correct. with respect to this, our investment in Northern Healthy Foods has increased by $448,000 in actual spends. And moving forward, we look forward to maximizing those dollars fully.
The member from Quaitnook.
So thank you for that clarification as to the numbers then being correct. So with the numbers then being correct, it is showing that the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative Program was in fact over the last 5 years underspent by almost $2.9 million. That's almost 45%. So the question then remains is first off, where was that allocated to? But more so, why is more not being done to reinvest all this underspending to ensure northern communities get access to that affordable, healthy food?
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the members' information here, on June of 2020, the government of Manitoba announced a pilot project to provide fresh, healthy foods to families with school-aged children in multiple sites throughout the province. Learning resources were included with the food to facilitate nutritional education. And I was actually in Woboden discussing what was going on there with the individuals looking to the program and how they were getting the packages out to the individual communities along the Bay Line, along with the information they needed with regards to the nutritional aspects of the food and how they could prepare the food once they received it. As part of this project, the government allocated $273,000 towards multiple communities along Manitoba's Bay Line. Like I said, there was Woboden, there's Thicket Portage, Pico-Tony, Ilford. The portion of the project was facilitated by the Bayline Regional Round Table. And in September of 2020, the government announced a $280,000 expansion of the Bayline portion of the project. Between 80 and 160 families have received food and educational resources each week since July, when the pilot was implemented. And in December of 2020, the government announced an additional investment of $1.2 million to extend the program until the end of March 2021.
Member from Quaitnook.
Just to kind of switch gears a little bit, I was wondering if does the minister agree that the Métis are a rights-bearing group?
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Yes, I do believe that the Métis are a rights-bearing group.
The member from Quaitanook.
So does the minister agree then that it is the duty to consult with the Métis people?
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe the Métis have rights under Section 35 that are protected by the Constitution of Canada that require the government to consult when any treaty or First Nation rights may be affected.
The member from Tyndall Park.
I'd like to thank the NDP for allowing me 10 minutes to ask some questions. With that, 10 minutes goes by really quick, so I plan to keep my questions short and concise, and my hope is that the minister will do the same with his answers. The first question is the Consultation and Reconciliation Division of IRNR is estimated to increase by $3,000. Could the minister please detail the $3,000 increase, and why isn't the province investing more in consultation and reconciliation?
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you. Could you clarify? Did you say $3,000? And if you have $3,000, where did you find that figure from?
Okay, just a reminder to pose all questions and answers through the chair, not to you. It needs to come through a third party. So with that, I'll call on the member from Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I apologize. It would have been $300,000. I don't have the page number right in front of me, but I will get that to the minister. I suspect he should be aware of it, though it was one of the increases made for consultation. I'm just going to throw in my second question with this information here. Under infrastructure, winter roads underspent by $1.1 million, just over 10% of the entire budget. And if he could talk a little bit about this and how are northern Indigenous communities negatively affected when they don't have their basic infrastructure in place.
The member from Tyndall Park.
Person, and I just wanted to clarify, as I received a little bit more information, it is in fact 3,000. It's found on page 14 of the estimates book. It's the number 2,337,000 has been increased to 2,400,000.
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that clarification. We too found where that is reported as $3,000 difference, and that difference is to offset guaranteed salary increases over that time period. With respect to the question regarding the winter roads, the MI is the department that looks after the winter road program. We do not have any details of their spending in front of us at the present time. I would assume, I don't know correctly or not, we had an abnormal season. It was abnormally warm last season, which may have resulted in a much shorter season, and possibly one of the reasons for underspending on the roads. But really, we'd have to reach out to the Department of Infrastructure for that information.
The member from Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and this will be my last question. Just wondering why the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative underspent by $244,000, a 25% reduction of the budget for the program.
The Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's unfortunate that the member missed my responses to some of these questions previously. Just want to restate that we have increased funding to our core program by $163,000. And that was money used to stabilize the program and increase the flexibility needed for other northern communities. We've provided $270,000 in discretionary grants, which I previously read into the record. And those include grants for communities like Grand Rapids, $35,000, Churchill, $25,000, and NACC, $40,000. The member will also notice that we have increased actual spending by $448,000 over last year. And while underspending $240,000 on the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative, the government has actually allocated over $108 million to the Bayline pilot project. And I had explained, during my summer travels that I did attend the community of Woboden, where the Bayline pilot project was being undertaken, and goods were being prepared, the foods were being prepared to ship out to communities along the Bayline, and it was the project was a tremendous success in the communities. And I just need to clarify here that we allocated 1.8 million. I don't know if I said 108 million, but it was 1.8 million that we allocated to the Bayline pilot project.
The member from Flin Flon.
Thank you very much. And my first chance, I guess, to congratulate the minister on his appointment. So you've talked about some things that you've done with the Healthy Food Initiative on the Bayline communities. Could you tell us what exactly it is you've done to help out, particularly the fly-in communities?
Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for clarification for the member, the government doesn't deliver the programs. The programs are delivered by our partners, and the partners that we have are the Bayline Regional Roundtable, Food Matters Manitoba, Four Arrows Regional Health Authority, the Northern Association of Community Councils, and the Frontier School Division. Of those two, Food Matters Manitoba and Four Arrows Regional Health Authority work with communities that reach out to them for assistance. The programming is designed to support healthy foods in the North and throughout the North. And our staff are currently in discussion with officials at the federal government level to look at expanding this best practices program moving forward.
The member from Flin Flon.
I just have one question on a different matter. When it comes to internet service providers in the northern communities, your government has chosen ExploreNet to be the one that's going to take that on. Is the minister aware that many of the communities already have service from ExploreNet, and a goodly portion of them are not very happy with that service? Can the minister explain why the decision was made to grant ExploreNet the contract as opposed to seeing if there were alternate, better service providers out there?
The Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And following a competitive tendering process, the Manitoba government signed a memorandum of understanding with ExploreNet Communications to connect more than 125,000 unserviced or underserved Manitobans with reliable high-speed internet services. The COVID pandemic has reinforced the importance of broadband connectivity and the need to ensure that Manitobans have access to critical and timely information and services, no matter where they live, work, or travel in Manitoba. And I can tell you that has never hit home more than when I was traveling on my listening and learning journey earlier this year. So the agreement between the province and ExploreNet Communications will provide broadband services to nearly 30 First Nations and approximately 270 rural and northern communities. Additionally, this agreement will also serve 350 communities with cell phone access. And with that, ExploreNet is looking forward to collaborating with the government of Manitoba to accelerate the network investment plans to deliver improved speeds and unlimited data plans at affordable prices to rural Manitobans' homes and businesses. So with that, once the contribution agreement with ExploreNet is finalized, they will be able to actually engage actively with First Nations on fiber access needs. And I am very excited that ExploreNet will actively be reaching out to communities that require these internet services. And they will also be actively working with other partners to deliver internet services into those northern and remote communities.
Are there any further questions? Hearing no further questions, we will now proceed to consideration of resolutions. At this point, we'll allow all virtual members to unmute their mics so they can respond to the questions. Okay, I will now call Resolution 19.2. Be it resolved that there be granted to Her Majesty a sum not exceeding $28,753,000 for Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations, for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass. Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed. The last item to be considered for these estimates is item 19.1A, the Minister's Salary, contained in Resolution 19.1. The floor is now open for questions. Hearing no questions? Resolution 19.1. Be it resolved that there be granted to Her Majesty a sum not exceeding $1,760,000 for Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations, Administration, and Finance. Okay. I'm gonna read that again because my 16s I guess sound like 60s. So, be it resolved that there be granted to Her Majesty a sum not exceeding $1,716,000 for Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations, Administration, and Finance for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed. Okay, with that, then this completes the estimates of the Department of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations. So So the next set of estimates to be considered by this section of the Committee of Supply is for the Department of Legislative and Public Affairs. Shall we briefly recess to allow the minister and critics the opportunity to prepare for the commencement of the next department? Agreed, so we will sit in recess. I think we got everybody here. Will the Committee of Supply please come to order? This section of the Committee of Supply will now consider the estimates of the Department of Legislative and Public Affairs. Does the Honourable First Minister have an opening statement? In the interest of time. First Minister?
Pointed and good questions. I will not make an opening statement.
We thank you for those comments. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? We thank the member. So under Manitoba practice, debate on the minister's salary is the last item considered for a department in the Committee of Supply. Accordingly, we shall now defer consideration of line item 22.1A contained in Resolution 22.1. At this time, I invite the department staff to approach the table and would ask that the First Minister please introduce his staff.
Mr.
First
Chair.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Pleased to welcome Deputy Minister Elliott Sims to the table, and also to the room Colin Hornby, who is the Special Assistant.
And we thank you for that. Does the committee wish to proceed through the estimates of this department chronologically or have a global discussion? Global discussion? Thank you so much. It is agreed that we will proceed in a global manner with all resolutions to be passed once questioning has concluded. The floor is now open for questions. A member from Notre Dame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can the minister please provide clarity for the committee if it was he who gave approval to removing key information from the estimates books, such as staffing and spending levels? Who directed that this be done or looked into?
First Minister.
It wasn't me, but I think that information should be returned for future estimates.
The member from Notre Dame. The floor is still open for questions.
He's saying he's not going to answer better than that.
Order. Member from Notre Dame, if you have a question.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So was it Brian Pallister that directed that this be done or looked into?
The First Minister.
I don't know, but I think the information should be returned, and the estimates book should revert to the form that they had historically been formatted in.
The member from Notre Dame.
Thank you for that. Could the minister please provide the documentation or background information on how that follows best practices?
The First Minister.
It's best practice for me to say that it should be returned to the form that it was previously formatted in. I think the critic should take that as a win for today.
The member from Notre Dame.
Okay, I think I understand that now. Thank you. Our next question is about Fipa. How many full-time employees are there and how many vacancies are there for Fipa across government departments? Can the minister please provide a breakdown of how many Fipa staff there are currently working in each department, specifically for finance, central services, executive council?
The First Minister.
Yeah, I thank the member for the question. There are 5 individuals within this department who deal with FIPA. Across the individual departments, there are FIPA officers within each department. So we would have to endeavor to seek that information from other departments in terms of the absences that exist within other departments for their FIPA officers.
Member from Notre Dame.
Could the minister please provide what the average response time is per department?
First Minister.
It would be maintained within their individual departments. Again, we can seek to try to find that information.
The member from Notre Dame.
Will the minister and premier please undertake that information that we'll get to that?
The First Minister.
We're best.
The member from Notre Dame.
Will the minister please explain what work has been done to improve Fipa response times and processes since the Ombudsman report released in June 2020?
The First Minister.
Yeah, I thank the member for the question. So there's a number of things. The member will know new legislation came into place regarding freedom of information and the responses that can come out of FIPA. And I think that I acknowledge that this is important for all members. I was in opposition for a long time, relied on freedom of information, but it's not just political parties, although that's become more of a preponderance over the last number of years that political parties are disproportionately using it compared to the rest of the public. But it's an important aspect of government. So the legislation that was brought in was intended to help in many ways. While some might say that it will extend the time, we also think that there's an opportunity to reduce the time that responses are coming from the freedom of information officers in the individual departments. There probably also are some changes that need to happen on the technological side of things, and that there needs to be coordination across departments and to ensure that responses are coming in a uniform way and the intake is coming in a uniform way. So lots of work ongoing. I know that the member opposite feels strongly about freedom of information, as do I. There needs to be timely access, but also access that provides the right information in the right way.
Member from Notre Dame.
Any chance of hiring more staff to deal with FIPA backlogs and timeliness issues like what the Ombudsman suggested?
The First Minister.
Yeah, there's always opportunities to look at adding staff where there's a deficiency. I think that it's not always just about staff; it's about using that time well and ensuring they have the right technological resources to coordinate properly across the FIPA system. But if the limiting factor is staff, then that would be something that would be considered.
The member from Notre Dame.
Has the Ombudsman's follow-up audit of Finance, Central Services, Executive Council, and Crowns begun yet?
First Minister.
I'm not aware if the follow-up audit's begun.
The member from Notre Dame.
And for the new act, what changes are underway in anticipation of the new FIPA Act taking effect in January?
The First Minister.
Member will know that the forms and the intake will be changing when it comes to applying for freedom of information. The regulations will be published and there'll be a I believe, in a month or so. So the public and the member opposite and others who are interested can provide feedback on those regulations when they become public. I know that she'll be interested in that, and other members will as well.
Member from Notre Dame.
On page 8 of the annual report, it states providing legislative and policy direction on the administration of FIPA, including the development of amendments to the statute and the access and privacy regulation in conjunction with the statutory review of the Act. Is the minister planning on further regulatory or legislative changes aside from the bill that was recently passed?
The First Minister.
Not at this point, no.
Member from Notre Dame.
Do issues management meetings regarding Fipa still regularly occur?
The First Minister.
I don't meet on the issue of FIPAs that are coming in. I think the deputy minister would meet at times cross government just to manage the flow of FIPA requests, but I don't have meetings regarding FIPA.
Member from Notre Dame.
In addition to the deputy minister, who else would be accompanying you in these issues management meetings regarding Fipa?
First Minister.
So within the individual departments, there are FIPA coordinators who are assigned, either directors or ADMs, generally at that level. So the deputy minister would liaise with the individuals who are responsible for FIPA in the individual departments.
Member from Notre Dame.
So the answer is that you're not meeting anymore with issues management meetings with Fipa anymore? Or
I
it's
just
a
want to
hand-
caution the member that all comments should be directed through the
Sorry.
chair, please. Go ahead, the member from Notre Dame.
Thanks for that direction, Mr. Chair. So there won't be any more meetings with issues management and Fipa, not on a regular basis, just like a handful every year?
The First Minister.
We're not certain what you're referring to when you're speaking of issues management meetings.
The member from Notre Dame.